Well, folks, welcome back to my studio and another summer of drawing. And this is class number 10. And we're going to be doing some work on toned paper today using some of the skills that you've already picked up this summer with the idea of doing what I call sort of a travel sketch or travel drawing. And something that you can do, in an hour or two really easily. It kind of looks nice. But it uses all the various different techniques that we normally bring into play in drawing anyway. But we're going to add a little charcoal at the end just for depth. And I've selected an image for us to work with today that hopefully will help us do that. And I also wanted to talk about where we're going to go next. And that is that we're going to start bringing line back in. Now, I've spent the last almost 2 years telling you not to rely on outlines, but there's a place in drawing for line. It just isn't really instead of values and mass. So I think it's always useful to start talking about that other stuff first and then work a line back in as another expressive quality. So as we go forward in the next couple of weeks, those of you who really draw a lot in line work will be really happy to know that we'll be doing a lot, including techniques around that. But for today, let's go ahead and get started with what we have for today. So welcome back to another summer of drawing. And this is class number 10, and it's still on the theme of home. We still have 9 more interpretations to go. But today we're going to be talking about a portal. And it's kind of an interesting portal. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking about, well, actually drawing this dolmen. And this is in Ireland, and it is called a portal dolmen. And so my interpretation for you guys today is that we're looking at this portal as an entrance or home to spirits or memories. But in actuality, these were used often as burial sites. I've got this quotation here. If you actually want to learn more about dolmens, this particular web link in the PDF will take you to a good site. Dolmens as a monument type are generally classified by a kind of entrance feature, the portal or doorway opening into the burial chamber. This portal or entry is often found closed by a blocking stone. The most characteristic feature of a portal dolmen is the massive capstone or roof stone, often weighing tens of tons and usually inclined at an angle, with the highest portion over the entrance or portal. So I thought, when it came to home, there was this sort of almost a home-like structure to dolmens. Also, Ireland is my ancestral home, or one of them, and so I can sort of have that connection there. But I also just like this idea of an image like this that we could work with today to sort of work in some charcoal along with our graphite, and also this idea of enhancing perhaps the imagery that we have to make it a little bit more dramatic and have a little bit more atmosphere. So along with the technical aspect of what we're going to do today, we're also going to be discussing how you take your reference or even what's going on around you and actually use it to accentuate the idea. So in this particular case, we have this home or this shelter, this dolmen, this portal. But we also have in the background, it's a cloudy day. Now, often I know when you take a photo, you probably have the same experience. Maybe it was a really fabulously cloudy and gusty day. When you take that image of that moment, it just doesn't capture, the rain or whatever happened to be going on. And so if you want to pull that kind of feeling out into a drawing and create more drama and atmosphere, one way to do that is to look at other imagery of sort of the feeling you're after, and then work out how to accentuate what is actually going on either in your image or around you to get that same feeling. So we'll be doing an exercise about that today, and then we'll also be working on pulling that feeling a little bit more into the drawing. All right, so just to review for people who are just joining now, or because this was back a couple of weeks that we talked about this, working on toned paper uses the paper as the local color. So when we get started, we have to really worry about are the darkest areas and the lightest areas, because toned paper, that mid-tone paper, does all the rest of the work. So we don't have to worry whether it's green or gray or brown or whatever the local color is. All of those colors will be taken care of by the toned paper. We only have to worry about the lights and the darks. So we're going to be drawing in the overall shape of the scene very lightly, just to get where everything is going to go. We're going to be squinting for the darks, addressing those first, adding in the lights and highlights, refine and restating just like we do all the time in a drawing. And then in this case, at the very end, we're going to add some charcoal to accentuate the darkness of the dolmen interior. All right. What needs to be in the scene? Well, the dolmen, obviously. And then some indication of the landscape, I think, would be useful. Although you really could, I mean, you could do the few rocks around the bottom and completely eliminate the landscape, and it would still be a really good drawing. I think the sky in this case, though, if we're going to deal with this scene, is useful for atmosphere. Excuse me, atmosphere. So noting the lighting direction and the cloud direction is always helpful. Seems like there's sort of a push from the left to the right. And in a way, there's also that same push in the dolmen top. The whole design sort of trends that way. So we're going to be thinking of how to accentuate that drama and doing a little exercise just to do a little observation about what a stormy sky looks like. One thing we can see here is that we've got a certain amount of a feeling of sort of a low cloud in the distance on the horizon. And then we've got, light and dark going on. But you really don't want to just sort of randomly put light and dark around. It's really useful to actually see what those clouds look like. So what we're going to do today is really we're going to get from, there's my little sketch at the top, and then down at the bottom right-hand side is a drawing that I did on toned paper. I used a dark toned paper just so you could sort of see what that looked like. And accentuating, using, the white and dark pencils just to accentuate that feeling of what's going on in the sky. I also did a few other things. I dropped the horizon line down because I wanted to accentuate the shape of the stones a little bit. And then also this business of adding charcoal at the end. So the first exercise, just to get you guys warmed up, is just to very quickly in your sketchbook, doesn't matter how you do it, which tools you use, to sketch a stormy sky. It doesn't have to be anything realistic. It doesn't have to be one of these photos. What we're trying to do here, though, is get the idea of how you might sketch, like what your drawing method would be to get a feeling of wind direction, storm coming in a particular way. And also noting, and this is the most important part, what clouds look like. So if you think of the sun up in the sky, and here's the cloud, the density of the cloud is going to affect how much light comes through that cloud and what we can see underneath it. If there is very little light that can come through, then the bottom of the clouds are going to be very dark. They're going to be dense. Maybe they're filled with water. Maybe it's ready to rain. Whereas wispy light clouds are going to be very white because, of course, we've got all of this light shining through. Keeping that in mind really helps when it comes to figuring out how you're going to draw clouds right out of your imagination. Because if you think about the sun up in the sky and then the clouds in between, the sun is usually not 100% directly over you. It's usually one to one side or another. That is going to affect how those tops of the clouds that we can't necessarily see, how they're lit, and then how some clouds might be blocking other clouds, or the density of the cloud is blocking the light. And you can see here in both of these pictures, there are places where the clouds have broken away, and we can see that light from above coming down on the tops of the clouds. And we can see that depending on the density of the cloud, we can see either a slight grayness or blueness to the bottom of the clouds, or it's really dark, heading towards almost black, definitely up in the 80%, 90% value range, very dark. All of these clouds, though, if you look at them, regardless of the density, have a lighter top and a darker bottom. Some very light going to white and some darker at the base. And in many cases, not always, Sometimes you will have at the horizon line, there'll be a darkness to the horizon because the storm is continuing. And sometimes, however, if a storm is rolling in, there'll be a lightness at the horizon line because back further, the light from the sun is getting through. The storm hasn't gone that far. And so those little details to watch for to sort of see what's happening. And you can see that light and dark scenario in the top photo in particular. On the left-hand side of the top photo, there is little to block the sun, and so there's still lightness coming down to the horizon. On the right-hand side, where the storm is continuing past where we can see, it's dark all the way down to the horizon. And sometimes you'll also get kind of a glow like you do in the bottom photo, where the light has come through in between clouds that you can't see further along. There's a break there, and it allows some light to hit the landscape. So all of these little observations are ways to add drama to a drawing or a painting by checking out what is actually going on with clouds and with a stormy sky, and how does it affect the surrounding landscape? Has it blocked out the light completely? Are there little areas where light is coming through? And just as you go around through sort of your everyday life, and I would love a little bit more stormy weather than we've been having because we're pretty light on rain right now, at least here on Chappaquiddick. But when you do see that storm come in, have a look and see what those clouds look like. Are the tops broken up? Are they full and fluffy? What's going on? And knowing this information will then allow you to enhance your photo reference as well, and make it look a little bit more lively, a little more like something is going on. So once again, we're talking about moving from drawing things to creating art by understanding what's happening and being able to, rather than just very carefully duplicating a photograph, trying to give some of that freedom, those strokes, and using the eraser and everything else that we learned from last week to give a sense of a sky like this. Okay, now that you guys are warmed up, we'll go ahead and get started on the real meat of today's class. So the first thing I'd like you to do is a thumbnail, like we normally do. And I just want to move forward for a second. Okay, I do show you what mine look like. I just had to check. So the first thing I'd like you to do is just do a very small, like 2-inch by 3-inch, no bigger than that, little drawing, planning out what you're going to do today. So toned paper, as we know, we start off with a light sketch. We add the darks. We add some lights. We look and see how that looks. We go back and refine, but we let the paper color, do most of the work. In this particular case, with the idea of this stormier sky, we can look at what we've already got in this scene for darks and lights and just accentuate it. We don't have to go crazy. We don't have to make it look like a tornado because because the dolmen is still our focal point. That's what we're drawing here. It's about home. It's not necessarily about this crazy storm. But knowing a little bit about how clouds work will give you that idea. So go ahead and take a few minutes just to work up your own little sketch. Here's mine right here. And with this idea of just pumping up your clouds just a little bit, giving them a bit of accentuation. So, excuse me. At this point, you know that I like to not just figure out where the lights and darks are going to be, and I didn't really accentuate them like I normally do for a no-tan at this point. Excuse me. But what I did do was I started to go, okay, I want an actual background sky here, rather than what I often do, which is just put some sort of white charcoal in the background and call it a day, so that the foreground and whatever I was really interested in gets accentuated. In this case, my final sketch, I want to have an actual sky back there. So I don't want it to compete with, I've only got graphite, charcoal, and white charcoal to do this in. So how do I make that happen? So this is where the blending stump or blending becomes really useful. So what I did when I was working on my sketch, I thought to myself, well, what if I just toned down the pencil and the white charcoal in the sky, left that a little bit less defined, and did a little bit more of the darks and the roughness and the unblended white and graphite for the actual landscape and the dolmen. And so I played around with that. I was like, okay, that worked pretty well. The other thing I also did was I pulled out my charcoal pencils and I just said, for the dark, how dark do I want to go? I want to be able to control this, so perhaps I'll start with an HB. Well, I found the HB didn't really get me quite as dark as I would want it on the final sketch. So I tried. I'm like, okay, let me go to 2B. That's a little bit better. So this is the little sketch like this is a really great place to try some of this stuff out. It doesn't mean you can't experiment on your drawing as you're actually doing it, but it does give you a little bit of an opportunity to figure out what's going on. And the other thing too, I was like, this idea of lowering the horizon. Um, I didn't dislike where it is in the photo, but I thought it would be a little bit more dramatic, have a little bit more dramatic sky if I lowered the horizon just slightly. Now, I didn't want to do it so much that I lost my sense of perspective because that would have meant I had to change other things around a little bit, maybe to still get that same feeling. But I just decided to knock it down a little bit so that it was more at the level, just a little bit lower than that smaller piece that's jutting up on the left hand side under the overhang. I just wanted it down a little bit, and this was a perfect place to try that. So I'm going to let you work on this for a few minutes before we get started on the actual sketch, because I think it's important to have a little bit of time to sort of think through how you're going to work on this. And one thing I'm going to be doing today is while you're drawing, I'm going to be reading a little bit from a book by a fellow named Howard Speed, and it's called The Practice and Science of Drawing. And it's a book that came out, I'm not exactly sure when. I'll have to look it up when I get started reading. Definitely early 1900s, that end of, rather than being a contemporary book. But it's a very interesting. I think I always like books that when I start to read them, they're saying things that I say. So that always is good to have my own thoughts reinforced. And yet also some things I don't agree with. I think it's really important to read books that people have written, to read biographies, understand a little bit about what other artists think, not because you want to take on all of those philosophies and all of those thoughts, but to then bounce your own ideas and thoughts against. And that's one of the reasons why I share so much of what I think about art with you in these classes, not because I think that you should think everything exactly the same as I do. But I think we all do need a starting point, and to hear somebody express something about art, and particularly an artist saying it, and not a historian or a curator or someone like that, because we have a tendency to accept what they say as gospel. They're not necessarily speaking from the heart of an artist. I think that's a different perspective, and I do believe that by actually drawing and trying different things and having our own ideas about what we like and don't like, that we can appreciate perhaps what a historian or a critic or someone else has to say, but we also have our own views. And we get our own views by being exposed to a lot of other views and sort of sorting out what we feel about that. And so this is why, for the rest of the classes, I'm going to try to find different things to read from, just to give you some thoughts about drawing in particular, which you can agree with or disagree with. All right, we're going to go ahead and get moving on to the first stage of this drawing. So the very first thing to do, and it'll take you a few minutes because there are some odd angles to this dome, and luckily with the landscape, you can sort of freeform it. I'm just going to only show you little pictures today because you guys know where to go with this stuff. You know what these stages are all about. My picture is there for reference, but I really want you to concentrate mostly on what you're doing. So just using a medium pencil, H or HB, carefully sketch in the main lines of the scene, starting with the focal point. And for me, the focal point was, the dolmen. Now, I did find that I started on the left side of the dolmen, in order to make sure that I was on the page where I wanted to, where often I'll start with something like the portal and then kind of move out. You also don't have to make a rectangle first. You can start drawing, get your thing squared away, and then figure out where your rectangle is going to be afterwards. So, don't worry about that. And we're going to have a reasonable amount of time. I think I'm going to give you like 9 minutes to get this first outline done because I think it's really important to the rest of the drawing that this bit is as accurate as you can make it. And it takes a little while to see what's going on, to see, these are some odd shapes. Overall, it's a relatively simple shape, but within there's some complexity. This is also where I decided to drop the horizon. And once I did that, I saw that I didn't want it to meet at the top of that leaning over stone on the left. Otherwise, that would attract too much attention. I needed it just below there in order for it to work. But I was really happy with that layout. And then I just sort of indicated a little bit where, where the clouds and things were going to go, because I know that in future steps, I'll be able to sort this out. So while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and look up my book here and read you a little bit from The Practice and Science of Drawing. I am looking to see when it was written. Let's see. "1913." Okay, so we're reading from a book that's over 100 years old, but I think it has some very applicable information. Of course, now I've lost my spot. There we go. All right, so what he's talking about in this particular chapter is academic or conventional art. And by academic art, he's referring to the drawing of plaster casts and that sort of thing. So we've talked, a certain amount about that academic drawing style. And I tend to like you to use it. I think the technique is interesting, but to use it in a freer way rather than just drawing casts. Although those are fun. I mean, doing one or two of those I think is a really good exercise. But at the time that Speed was writing this book, there were many drawing schools and many art schools where that really had become the overall focus. And he was very keen to see artists get a little bit freer. He was afraid that too much of that academic drawing was actually going to, stifle people. And I think this is eventually what abstract art started to rebel against was this overly formalized way of approaching art that didn't really allow for any other interpretation. So I'm just going to read some paragraphs out of this chapter. It says, "It has been the cry for some time that schools of art turned out only academic students, and one certainly associates a dead level of respectable mediocrity with much schoolwork. We can call to mind a lot of dull, lifeless, highly finished work, imperfectly perfect, that has won the prize in many a school competition. Flaubert says," whoops, turn the page here, "form deadens, and it does seem as if the necessary formality of a school course had some deadening influence on students, and that there was some important part of the artist's development which it failed to recognize and encourage." And then he goes on to say, "But perhaps the chief mistake in art schools has been that they have too largely confined themselves to training students mechanically to observe and portray the thing set up before them, to copy an antique figure, a still life group, a living model sitting as still and lifeless as he can. Now, this is all very well as far as it goes, but the real matter of art is not necessarily in all this. And if the real matter of art is neglected too long, the student may find it difficult to get in touch with it again. These accurate, painstaking school studies are very necessary indeed as a training for the eye in observing accurately and the hand in reproducing the appearance of things, because it is through the reproduction of natural appearances and the knowledge of form and color derived from such study that the student will afterwards find the means of giving expression to his feelings. But when valuable prizes and scholarships are given for them, and not for really artistic work, they do tend to become the end instead of the means." And then he goes on to say, it is difficult to explain what is wrong with an academic drawing and what is the difference between it and a fine drawing. But perhaps this difference can be brought home a little more clearly if you will pardon a rather fanciful simile. I am told that if you construct a perfectly fitted engine, the piston fitting the cylinder with absolute accuracy and the axles their sockets with no space in between, etc., it will not work, but be a lifeless mass of iron. There must be enough play between the vital parts to allow some movement. Dither is, I believe, the Scotch word for it. The piston must be allowed to some play in the opening of the cylinder through which it passes, or it will not be able to move and show any life. And the axles of the wheels and their sockets, and in fact all parts of the machine where life and movement are to occur, must have this play, this dither. It has always seemed to me that the accurately fitting engine was like a good academic drawing, in a way a perfect piece of workmanship, but lifeless, imperfectly perfect, because there was no room left for the play of life. And to carry the simile further, if you allow too great a play between the parts, so they fit one over the other too loosely, the engine will lose power and become a poor rickety thing. There must be the smallest amount of play that will allow its working. And the more perfectly made the engine, the less will be the amount the less will the amount of this dither be. The word dither will be a useful name to give that elusive quality, that play on mechanical accuracy, existing in all vital art. It is this vital quality that has not yet received much attention in art training. So you can see why I like you can see why I like Speed and what he has to say. But it's fascinating to me that, over 100 years ago, this exact problem of being a little too, too tight was adhered to. So let's move on to the next part of drawing, and then I can share a bit more with you. So at this particular point, what I want you to do is squint and look for the darkest areas. And this is where I want to remind you also that even if we're working on toned paper, we've got to remember to let the paper do as much work as it possibly can. What we're really looking for is only to have to draw the darkest parts and the lightest parts and let the paper do the rest of the work. Now that's a real challenge, I think, on an image like this. Let's see. Oops, sorry. Where we've got these greens and we've got browns and we've got grays, and we're not quite exactly sure like which ones of those are supposed to be the local color, like which ones do I assign to the paper. And so if we just start with the darks and don't worry about color at all, just squint. I'll probably end up with mascara under my eyes from doing that. Just squint, look at the image, look at where the darkest darks are and start there. And then add just a little bit more of the darks, just like the next step. When we think of the value scale going from very dark to very light, we don't want to get in the mid-range. The paper's doing that for us. All we want are those first few darks, super dark, like almost black, and the gray tones close to it. And then we're going to come in on the other end with the whites and the very light percentages, and we're going to let the paper do everything else in the meantime. So what I used here to do this in a relatively speedy manner was I used my beveled ends of my pencils, which I have to tell you, I am loving using beveled ended pencils because I'm getting better at this business of using the bevel, like if I'm doing a line, like say these horizon lines or these lines of the fields going across, of using the beveled part to make a thick line and then kind of tilting it up on its end to get thinner and then coming back down. Because of course, as I deposit graphite, that keeps the bevel end, even if I've kind of rounded it for a second, when I come back and do some more, I get the bevel back again. And also, to do washes on the interior of the dolmen and to start kind of doing a few stutter kind of marks underneath the dolmen rooftop there. Really, really helpful to be able to get that first pass. And then when I came back to do sort of the next darks, I took one of the pencils that I had sharpened more pointy, in an academic manner. I think I used the 2 or 4B to get my first darks down using the beveled end, and then I used like an HB that had more of the academic pointy, and then I was able to go in and start getting those little details that I wanted and getting the form and all of that stuff sorted out. So while you're drawing this bit, I'm going to go ahead and read you some more. So Speed goes on to say, so he just talked about dither and that vital quality, and I think that's what I was hoping. Last week when we did those wrenches, and we were being a little bit more free about how we went about it. That's that vital quality. When you first approach a subject like we are with the dolmen today, I think it's a little hard to get a lot of vitality in, because you are concentrating on, like, what does this thing look like? But if you come back and you draw it again, now all of a sudden you can get that same sweep, and those some of that messiness we did last week, for the stormy sky and all the rest of it, because you'll have had an idea and kind of worked out where you're going. But when I'm traveling and I see something like this and I want to spend 45 minutes or an hour sketching, I may or may not come back and reapproach it. So I want to get a little of that feel in, a little bit of that movement, and some of that energy. Anyway, back to Howard Speed for a second. So he says, it is here that the photograph fails. It can only at best give mechanical accuracy, whereas art gives the impression of a live individual consciousness. Where the recording instrument is a live individual, there is no mechanical standard of accuracy possible, as every recording instrument is a different personality. And it is the subtle differences in the individual renderings of nature that are the lifeblood of art. The photograph, on account of its being chained to mechanical accuracy, has none of this play of life to give it charm. It only approaches artistic conditions when it is blurred, vague, and indefinite. And in so-called artistic photography, because then only can some amount of this vitalizing play, this dither, be imagined. It is this perfect accuracy, this lack of play, of variety, that makes the machine-made article so lifeless. Wherever there is life, there is variety, and the substitution of the machine-made for the handmade article has impoverished the world to a greater extent than we are probably yet aware. Whereas formerly, before the advent of machinery, the commonest article you could pick up had a life and warmth which gave it individual interest. Now everything is turned out to such a perfection of deadness that one is driven to pick up and collect, in sheer desperation, the commonest rubbish still surviving from the earlier period. Now, in 1913, this guy had no idea what we were all in for. But, I think this is, we see the sameness of the shopping malls, the sameness of the stores, of the articles we buy. Even, I live in a resort area, and even some of the tchotchkes sold to people are the same tchotchkes you can find in other places. And that is what makes what we're doing in these classes so extremely important. This whole idea that we are producing something very different and unique. And it's unique because each one of us has done it. But I think that also scares people, because we're living in a world that has so much uniformity, and uniformity has become prized. That when you buy, for example, one pair of jeans and the next pair of jeans, you're expecting them to be basically the same. So if the sameness becomes this thing we're striving for, then no wonder academic art and the revival of academic art has proven to be so attractive. Now, as you know, I like academic art and I am not trying to bash it. But what I am saying is that it isn't a be all and end all in itself. It's a technique. It is a way of learning really good size measurement, modulating your pencil, really good pencil control. Certainly, it's a great way to be able to mark out and get your images started when you're drawing. But I think that life, vitality in art comes from doing the sorts of things that we're doing and applying those techniques to them. Now, in an hour or so, we only ever get an opportunity to go so far. And I really do think that, taking any one of these drawings further is really the way, to get in and explore, what you can do. I am hoping that these introductions, these sort of ways into drawing, these 19 different sort of ways we're doing it, that as you go on and draw yourself, that you'll give yourself that time to sort of slow down, and get, even when we are using a photograph, try to get away from just a reproduction and instead think about this scene. So if we're at that point now where you're working in the sky and you're starting to get that part in, I really want you to look back at that initial little sketch that you did, that thumbnail, and look at that vitality that you added to the sky when you were trying to get it to look a little bit more like those very stormy scenes from those little pictures. And see if you can't bring that into your pencil work as you go. Because really, what you're looking for is a vitality of sky that contrasts that kind of movement and action with this structure that has stood for thousands and thousands of years. That is what you're, that is the contrast, the tension, basically, in this drawing. If we just had, a dolmen portal standing very still, and a sky standing very still, and a landscape standing very still, it would be interesting, but it wouldn't really have that feeling of vitality. So let's just move on at this point to where we add the whites in, which is always my favorite bit. Okay, so at this particular point, this is where we add in with white charcoal pencil or white pencil, whatever we have. You can do it with gouache or whatever material you want to. Now we add in those highlights. This is really difficult to not start like trying to find highlights everywhere where you don't really actually see them. So this is also a good time to look back at your initial sketch where you just sort of really concentrated on the lights. But something else is happening in this particular image that is a little different. Because I want a kind of stormier sky than what I see right now, I have to decide, is my sky lighter or is the dolmen top lighter in my drawing? And so what I've decided is I liked that idea of putting down the white charcoal and sort of smudging it out. And I decided that because of that, I am going to keep my sky stormier and not as defined. And I actually want my dolmen to be whiter along the edge in value than the background, rather than the way it is in this image. So that's a little, making those decisions is fine. You just have to be consistent about how you actually apply them. So what I did was I just started with the background. I figured that would be easier. I put a little bit of white charcoal down. I didn't need to put a lot. And then I took a clean, I think I used a Q-tip, and I smudged both the dark I had put down before and the light in the sky only to create sort of that feeling of storminess. Now I know I can enhance this, but I wanted that business back there done. And then I started adding in the lights to the rest of the scene. Now the size of this image in real life is, I've got it right here. It's about 5 by 7. I'm sort of holding it up here to the camera. I'll show it to you at the end. But it's not as small as it's appearing on the screen, of course. So I was able to, put in some directional lines following the edge of the dolmen top. The uprights, I was able to put, my shading or my charcoal. I was able to, try to add a little texture as I drew. So back to this whole idea of texture for a minute. When you're dealing with something like this that is very stony, what you want to do is concentrate on only where you see the lightest part. So we're not trying to color in a gray stone. What we're trying to do is look at where is the light actually hitting this stone, or where is it light in color, and put those highlights only in those places. Now it's a tough call in some of these spots, where you've got some of this mottled stuff where it's light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. You kind of have to make an overall decision whether you want your rocks to be lighter or you want them to be darker. Likewise, in the background, it would be easy to say, well, I'd like all of that bright green to be designated by using my white charcoal pencil. I decided not to, because I just wanted the shiny tops of the rocks that were sort of disappearing a little bit, over to the right, that were lying down there. I wanted, that to sort of continue the lightness and not compete with the dolmen. But that is an individual decision. That, just because I decided to do it this way doesn't mean that you have to. What's really important is just to avoid that temptation to put pencil marks everywhere. We're definitely trying to make sure that the paper is going to do most of the work for you. But I did like this business now that we've brought in some judicious blending into our various different drawings. This idea of, making it work for you rather than blending out the whole thing, which I don't think would be so effective. This idea that, well, maybe a little bit of blending here, a little bit of blending there. And in this case, particularly the sky, because it means that there's less detail to the sky. And we already know that more detail and more contrast brings things forward, and less detail and softness and all of that stuff sends things backwards. So that helps, even in a small drawing, to get a little bit of feeling of distance. So I'm going to go back to Howard Speed again for a few minutes and read you a couple more things. He says here, but to return to our drawings, if the variations from strict accuracy made under the influence of feeling are too great, the result will be a caricature. The variations in a beautiful drawing are so subtle as to often defy detection. The studies of Ingres are an instance of what I mean. How true and instinct with life are his lines, and one might assume they were merely accurate, but no merely accurate work would have the impelling quality these drawings possess. If the writer may venture an opinion on so great an artist, the subtle difference we are talking about was sometimes missed even by Ingres himself when he transferred his drawings to the canvas, and the pictures have, in some cases, become academic and lifeless. Without the stimulus of nature before him, it was difficult to preserve the dither in the drawing, and the life has escaped. This is the great difficulty of working from studies. It is so easy to lose those little points in your drawing that make for vitality of expression in the process of copying in cold blood. The fact is, it is only the academic that can be taught, and it is no small thing if this is well done in a school. The qualities that give vitality and distinction to drawing must be appreciated by the student himself, and most often in his drawing without his being aware that he is doing aught but honestly copying. And if he has trained himself thoroughly, he will not find much difficulty when he is moved to vital expression. All the master can do is stand by and encourage whenever he sees evidence of the real thing. But there is undoubtedly this danger of the school studies becoming the end instead of the means. A drawing is not necessarily academic because it is thorough, but only because it is dead. Neither is a drawing necessarily academic because it is done in what is called a conventional style, any more than it is good because it is done in an unconventional style. The test is whether it has life and conveys genuine feeling. So I think there's a lot there's a lot of merit in his view there. He's not he doesn't hold back, does he? When he doesn't like something. Very interesting. This book is really wonderful. It has quite a bit. He covers quite a bit of subject matter, and has a lot also if you're drawing with the idea of painting in mind. Okay, let's move on to the next step here, because I want to spend a little bit more time on these last steps. Okay, it is now time to refine the drawing, and that means restating the darkest darks and the lightest lights and smoothing out areas that need better pencil shading or softening. Um, at this point, you can also add a little pencil to the darks, but I'd like you to do that at the very, very, very end. In fact, I'm going to just page forward once. This is showing how I added the darks, okay, just so you can see where I'm going. It makes a huge difference. It's also very, very, very hard to control. So I'm going to just move us back to we'll stick to pencil right now. But you can see how, unless you're really mashing that pencil in, even using a dark pencil on most tone papers have a little bit of texture to them, and it becomes really difficult to get in the grooves and really lay a lot of pencil down. And, as I was pointing out before, the reflective and kind of slippery nature of graphite, as opposed to the dense sort of, I don't even know what the word would be, having a little bit more traction, perhaps, feeling of charcoal, means that it is harder to get more and more layers of pencil to lay on top of each other. So what I tend to do is I'll go as far as using like a 6B or a 4B, but I'm not trying to mash down the texture of the paper. When I get to a point where I can't get any darker, I leave it at that and sort of balance the whole drawing out. And then I come back with, maybe my finer pencils to do a bit more detail. I add a little bit more white. In this case, I went a little bit more into the darks on the sky with with a fine, something like I think a fine or maybe even a 2H or something like that pencil, just to add a little bit more of that feeling of storminess. I'm still following really the photo reference, but I've kind of amped it up a little bit. And I'm also going, okay, well, if when I'm adding those darks, and now I've got to maybe add a few more darks, a few more little areas of stonework in the foreground, a little more texture and such to what's going in the background. Now, when you get the PDF from this class, you'll be able to see these images a little bit larger. But like I said, they're not all that big to begin with. Just sort of the kind of thing I could actually accomplish if I were actually out here at this scene and trying to get a drawing done. There's some landscape people coming by my studio right now along the street. So pardon the noise if you hear anything over the top of me right now. So I'll just let you work on this a little while. I've got another excerpt or two to read to you. There is much foolish talk about conventional art, as if art could ever get away from conventions, or if it would, the convention would be more natural or more abstract according to the nature of the thing to be conveyed and the medium employed to express it. But naturalism is just as much a convention as any of the other isms that art has lately been so assailed with. For a really unconventional art, there is Madame Tussaud's waxworks. There, even the convention of a frame and flat surface are done away with. Besides the painting symbols to represent things, they have real natural chairs, tables, floors, real clothes, and even real hair. Realism everywhere, but no life. And we all know the result. There is more expression of life in a few lines scribbled on the paper by a good artist than in all the reality of the popular show. It would seem that after a certain point, the nearer your picture approaches the actual illusion of natural appearance, the further you are from the expression of life. One can never hope to surpass the illusionary appearance of a tableau vivant. There you have real living people. But what an awful death-like stillness is felt when the curtain is drawn aside. The nearer you approach the actual in all of its completeness, the more evident is the lack of that movement which always accompanies life. You cannot express life by copying laboriously natural appearances. Those things in the appearance that convey vital expression and are capable of being translated into the medium he is working with have to be sought by the artist, and the painted symbols of his pictures made accordingly. This lack of movement of life is never noticed in a good picture. On the other hand, the figures are often felt to move. Pictures are blamed for being conventional when it is a lack of vitality that is the problem. If the convention adopted has not been vitalized by the emotion that is the reason of the painting, it will, of course, be a lifeless affair. But however abstract and unnaturalistic the manner adopted, if it has been truly felt by the artist as the right means of expressing his emotional idea, it will have life and should not be called conventional in the commonly accepted offensive use of the term. It is only when a painter consciously chooses a manner not his own, which he does not comprehend and is incapable of firing with his own personality, that his picture is ridiculous and conventional in the dead sense. But every age differs in its temperament, and the artistic conventions of one age seldom fit another. The artist has to discover a convention for himself, one that fits his particular individuality. But this is done simply and naturally, not by starting out with the intention of flouting all traditional conventions on principle, nor, on the other hand, by accepting all on principle, but by simply following his own bent and selecting what appeals to him in anything and everything that comes within the range of his vision. The result is likely to be something very different from the violent exploits and peculiarity that have been masquerading as originality lately. Originality is more concerned with sincerity than with peculiarity. All right, so I'll leave you with that for Howard Speed today, but I do highly recommend getting a copy of The Practice and Science of Drawing. It's available on Kindle. I think it's even available for free on Google Books. I am sure that the library has a copy, and we can ask Anne at the end about that. But there are some, that was 1913, and there are some real truisms in there, aren't there? And I think it's good to, read this stuff over and over again and sort of remember that, we're not reinventing the wheel here. People have had these thoughts before, and sometimes we need to read them coming from different sources to really sort of take these ideas on board, make them our own. But I hope it does help you to feel that regardless of what you're drawing, whether it's from real life or from a photo, from your imagination, that you are perfectly free to draw any way you want to. I'm introducing you to techniques, ways to use pencils, basically. But that is not a limiting factor. That should be a freeing factor for you to now experiment and see what you can do with those pencils. I'm showing you a bunch of ways, just as a stepping off point, to give you a little bit of guidance. But from there on out, the sky is really the limit. I think that we have a certain amount of fear that we feel about that freedom and want to confine ourselves within the academic or within a particular look or a style or certain materials. It is difficult and scary to jump off that cliff and try other things. So these little drawings, and while you're out sketching your neighborhood or whatever, these are a perfect place to get started. There's no risk. Nothing bad happens if the drawing doesn't work out. All right, I'm just going to page forward to that business where you can see the charcoal added. So when I got to the point of adding charcoal, things got scary really quickly because it doesn't take very much charcoal, especially on a small drawing, for it to get dark very fast. So I used just a 2B. I found the HB was a little too close to the pencil, and I really wanted that dark, that feeling of going inside. I used a 2B. I drew very carefully, and then I took one of my blending stumps and started blending. And immediately, it was really dark. It was really dense, and it was also kind of soft around the edges. So when I wanted to add that darkness underneath the top of the roof of the portal, I lost some of my edges, and I actually had to go back in with an eraser, pick those back out again, redefine some bits with graphite to get it all, back. I now had enough enough charcoal on my little blending stump that I was actually able to pull some of that darkness down to the bottom there of that rock face without actually doing any more drawing. And I didn't put any charcoal into my background. What I did do at that point was I realized, wow, that's really dark, and now my other darks are not as dark. So I did have to go back this time with a 6B graphite pencil, and just in a few places in the landscape, and just a few other little areas, just pump up the darks. What I didn't do was I didn't add more dark to the background, to the sky, than I already had. And then final pass was to put those lightest lights in. To go back with a very sharp white charcoal pencil and just ping the highlights, make sure that they were where I wanted, look back at my original little sketch and say, did I really kind of follow what I was looking for? And I also added a little unblended white right along the horizon line on the sky side, because I thought that I just really liked that idea. And I saw it in the image here that we're looking at, that feeling of distance created by the fact that there is sort of light in the distance. I like that very much, rather than having a lowering sky that went all the way down to the ground. I liked that bit of a line. So those are things that you can choose or not choose to put in. I also, somewhere along the line, definitely picked out with my eraser that little divot you see under the roof where there's some light that shines through. It's not the sky, it's kind of a highlight. And I probably over accentuated it a little bit because I thought it was so nice. But I thought that was really good to help give a little bit more dimension inside that space. So I'll give you just a minute or so to wrap this up, and then we'll bring this all to a finish. But I hope this was a little bit more calming than what we did last week. And we'll get you set as we move forward into other subject matters. Actually, really quickly, I'm going to look up and see if I can figure out what our next week is, what my plan for you for next week is, so you can be a little bit prepared. Okay, let's look at our list. Okay, so for next week, we are going to do a figurative subject with three people in it. So that'll be a little bit challenging, but we're going to pull line in. So for those of you who are more comfortable with line work, this will be an interesting way to go about drawing people. And this is going to be on white paper. We're definitely going to be working on white paper. So you'll have a chance to use either graphite and or charcoal, depending on what you'd like. Erasers are definitely going to play a part next week as well. So let me just pull us into the finish. So this is what we just did. Started with a rough sketch, line work, darks, lights, refining everything, and then finally just adding that little plunk of charcoal in for the super darks. So this is something that's really easy to do. Now, I don't usually, when I'm travel sketching, I don't usually actually travel with a charcoal pencil just because they're messy. And in my little pouch, I don't want to make a huge mess. But you could easily put the charcoal pencil in something different and a little Ziploc bag inside there, carry it along, and just sort of add a little extra zing to your drawings at the end. There's no doubt that between the last and the second to last drawing that's only graphite, that charcoal really does something for you there in small amounts. And just looking at it a little bit larger here, you can kind of see. And like I said, this will be in the PDF, so you'll be able to have a closer look. So concept, tell your own story, draw what is interesting to you. So even if the idea of how does this image tether to home, it tethered to home for me personally, and I felt like that was really all that mattered. And that's all that should matter for you as well. You don't have to worry about other people judging whether or not you've interpreted a concept properly. What really needs to go into the drawing? We've talked before about adding, removing, looking at other reference, adding things out of our memory and imagination. But atmosphere is really important, and it helps tell that story. Once again, don't skip the preliminaries, even if it's just a rough sketch. I'm sure you found it really helpful to have done everything once in miniature before starting the actual drawing. And then the technique, just to recap, using tone paper, squint, look for those darks, look for those lights, and do your very, very best to leave everything to the paper. Let that paper do the work for you rather than adding a lot of extra stuff in that really didn't have to go in there. And use a little charcoal now. You know how to do it. You're familiar with adding this extra thing in, the beveled pencils, the more pointy pencil for the academic, just regular conventional pencil points, and also the business of a little charcoal. Once again, varying the strokes, varying the distance, the direction, all of that kind of thing, and thinking in your head about the atmosphere. What are you trying to create here? Is it stormy? Is it placid? What's going on? All of that is really useful. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. Let's see. All right, folks, I think that's it for today. So next week, we're going to have 3 figures sitting on a bench in a scene. You'll like it very much. We're not going to be worrying about, can you draw anatomy? All right, that's not going to come into play. What is going to come into play are all of these techniques that we've been using up until now, so that when you do see a scene like this that you want to draw, you've got some idea how to approach it that isn't overwhelming. At least we hope not. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll look forward to seeing everybody next week for class number 11.
Okay, same here.
Thank you. Thanks so much.